In the name of the one who loves the beloved and love itself. Amen. Please be seated. Jesus was having a very busy day. The reading today comes right after the reading from last week. Do you remember last week? He calmed the storm as he was traveling across the lake. And then he gets to the other side and you'd think that was enough for one day. And yet there was a crowd there. There was a crowd, and he was going to encounter 3 more crowds before the day was out. There was a crowd there, and they were all pressing in on him and needing him and asking him for things. And in the midst of that crowd, Jairus came up and said, "My daughter is very sick. Will you come and heal her?" And Jesus said, "Yes, of course." And I wonder if the crowd heard and thought, "Let's follow. We might witness a miracle." And so they pressed in and were badgering him, and I imagine elbowing him and kind of like trying to get close to him and seeing if they could talk to him on the way to Jairus' house. And all this was happening, and suddenly Jesus felt something and paused and said, "Who touched me?" The disciples turned to him and said, "Don't be ridiculous. Like 15 people just touched you. There are elbows and there's bustling everywhere." And he's like, "No, I felt something. I felt some energy, some power go out from me. Who touched me?" And he turned and scanned the crowd and saw a woman who I can only imagine was terrified. But she knew it was her. So she tentatively put her hand up, perhaps shaking, and said, "It was me." Jesus looks at her and says, "And what did you need?" I'm sure he was reading her face, and he could see that she didn't want to open up about what was happening, because she'd just broken about 5 different rules. "I've been bleeding for 12 years. And physicians have tried to help me, and they haven't been able to. And I've run through all my money, and I didn't have any more hope. And so I've been stuck at home, because I know I'm ritually unclean." At that time, in that tradition, because of her condition, she would not have been able to be in company. She would have been isolated at home. Yet, she heard that the healer was coming, and she thought, maybe I can disguise myself, make myself very small. Maybe I can just crawl and touch the hem of his garment. I know there'll be a crowd. I know that I shouldn't be there, but maybe I can get what I need. And Jesus looks at her and says, "Well, did you?" And she says, "Yes. I feel myself healing already." So I imagine he then turns to the crowd around her, the crowd that she's not been allowed to be a part of, and says, "Look, this woman's faith has made her whole." And I wonder if his look invited them, accused them, challenged them. But perhaps one after another, they began to hug her. And she experienced a second healing. The healing of being with people. At which point, one of the leaders of the synagogue came up and said, "Don't bother the master anymore. The girl's dead." Can you imagine Jairus' face at that point? He's standing alongside watching this person getting healed, and yet his daughter is still in need. And then he hears that she's died. Can you imagine him looking at Jesus and thinking, if you hadn't stopped for this woman, you might have got to my house on time. And Jesus says, don't be afraid, have faith. So he carries on. The crowd's around him, the crowd that gathered around the woman has been around him. Now he gets to the house and there's another crowd outside, and they're wailing. Possibly professional mourners, possibly doing the duty of the community for the family that's bereaved, crying on their behalf. And Jesus looks at them and says, oh no, she's not dead, she's just asleep. And they laugh. It makes me wonder about the authenticity of the tears just a moment earlier. I'm not sure. But they think he's ridiculous. So then he says, okay, I need you all to go outside. I want the mother, the father, Peter, James, and John, and that's it. And we're going in, and we'll be with the girl. So Jairus, his wife, some of the disciples are there, and the inside of the room has become quieter. Jesus decided that's what he wanted. He needed it to be a peaceful space. And he says, Talita kum, which is Aramaic for little girl, get up. Talita kum. And she begins to move. And she stands. And Jesus takes her to her mother and says, will you get her something to eat? I wonder what your favorite part of the story was. I wonder if there's any part of that story we could leave out and still have all the story we need. I'm not sure. I felt like I needed Jairus and the crowd and the elbows and the bustle and the busyness. I needed the woman who was sick. I needed her to stand up and claim her space in society again. And I needed the tender moment with the little girl. And I needed Jesus to put everybody else outside and create calm in that moment. But there's a lot in this story. And there's a lot in life. I wonder if you can see yourself in the story. I wonder if your life feels like that, with one busy moment leading to another, one emotional trauma being interrupted by another, one thing distracting you when you've got to focus on something else. I wonder if you felt like the woman with the issue of blood who had to go home and be by herself and isolate. I wonder if we've all felt like that over the last year. We've tried to gather. We've tried to be with one another. We've had Zoom and we've had live stream. And I'm so grateful that we've got them. I'm so grateful we've still got that technology, but it's not quite the same. I wonder if you had to make accommodations in your emotional life to cope with being alone and isolated at home. I wonder if you had to develop habits of life that made it tolerable, even though it was intolerable. And I wonder what happens when we have to step out and start seeing each other again. You know, I got used to preaching to a video camera and imagining people behind it that I was trying to emote to. It was a shock when you started coming back again. I mean, I like it, don't get me wrong. I really like it, but you're responding. I'm not used to that. It's not happened in this space for me. I realized I got so used to those ways of behaving that I have to relearn being with each other. I wonder if we might acquire new ways of being together as we regather. that will be informed by our prolonged isolation. I wonder if we might choose to be kinder and gentler because we've had to face our darkness alone over the last year. And I wonder if it allows us to see that other people are facing darkness too on a daily basis. I wonder, as that woman began to open her life up and welcome people back into it, whether she just cherished it even more. I'm going to say something that I've noticed, which I invite you to notice too. I'm a natural extrovert. I quite like being with people. But I got so used to being on my own that being with people now is taking some more energy. The encounter that Jesus had with the woman took energy from him. Being with each other, reaching out to each other, encountering one another's needs will take energy from us. And rather than just skirt over that, we should name it and acknowledge it. And give thanks for the slight sense of tiredness that we feel at the end of the day because we've been working on relating to one another. And sometimes we should also identify when we need to be away from the crowd. Put them outside and just create an intimate space with a couple of friends for the deeper, more peaceful conversation that we need to have. I hope as we re-enter society and culture from this prolonged period of enforced isolation, that we make conscious choices about how we're going to be with one another. And those conscious choices will lead us to generating a kinder, more peaceful culture. I wonder.